it's difficult whether we're working from home or in the office to juggle, getting on these meetings any earlier, and most of you are juggling families, trying to eat dinner. So thank you for sharing your time with us. I have a lot of information to go over tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and just get started. My name is Jackie Medcalf, and I am the Executive Director of Texas Health and Environment Alliance. And tonight we're going to be talking about the San Jacinto River Waste Pits Superfund Site. But before we get into the presentation, I just want to mention a couple of things about housekeeping, and I am going to do my best to keep all of this information under an hour, including the Q&A session at the end. So I ask that you as well please be respectful of our fellow community members' time, their opinions, their feelings. I hope that this is a space where we can ask questions, share comments, and hopefully have productive dialogue. All the lines are muted as of right now, and they will be unmuted at the end of the presentation. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat box if you have them between now and then and don't, just want to make sure you don't forget them, or you can hold off until the end. Before we get into the Superfund site specific items, I want to bring up two community concerns that have taken place since we met last. We actually have not met for quite some time, since actually I believe November. So quite a bit has gone on, both with information we've received regarding the waste pits, and then also just in that local area that's prompted concerns. So the first item was that was a barge that sank just before Christmas. It sank on December 22nd. And so all the way up to Christmas, there was an ongoing cleanup operation, and, they had a boom around this, or booms around this tugboat. As you can see here, as it was sinking, there's a sheen of oil clearly present on the river's surface. And this actually took place at the Characterization San Jacinto River Fleet property. This is the closest shipyard to the San Jacinto River waste pits. And so if you see on the aerial view, you can see Interstate 10. Just north of that is the waste pits adjacent to the main channel of the river. And then you'll see the yellow pin drop, and that's the location of that business and about where that vessel actually sank. And so a lot of residents were concerned because they didn't feel like they were seeing Coast Guard. They were hearing from some of the response people that were out there that, that they felt they needed to access the waste pits to clean any of the oil that may have gotten within the waste pits boundaries, but didn't have access. And so all the way, through Christmas, this was quite a bit of dialogue between community members, myself, and our agencies. Harris County Pollution Control was wonderful to work with, and they were quite responsive. And the Coast Guard was the on-scene coordinator for this event. And then there was a private company that was in charge of the actual cleanup activities in the area. Okay, something else that's been going on for quite some time actually is the attempted development of a barge facility just north of Meadowbrook Park. So what used to be the Cove, or right adjacent to Riverside, the old bar and restaurant, and that also has the boat launch adjacent to it in Channel View's River Bottom. So this entire area is actually being bought out because of the repeated flooding and the need for that area to be used as a floodway zone in the future, not only just for storms, but also for releasing quantities of water from the Lake Houston Dam. So this area is within the San Jacinto River Waste Pits area of concern as set out by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which means that any entity who wishes to conduct, dredging or construction type operations in and around the waterway right here, they have to have a specific permit, and they need to be doing specific types of testing of the material to make sure that it is not contaminated with the material from the waste pits, and that they're not, causing more harm than good in attempts to set up their business. And this entity is not unfamiliar to folks in this community. This is actually the same entity that had had the big uproar in Beach City, if you will. They were requesting a permit that required some dredging activities, and the material was supposed to go to Beach City and the dredge spoil. And residents in Beach City were, very upset about that and the way that it was going to be handled there in their community. And so we have the same company that was actually, starting to put in a barge facility here. And we have a few really persistent, really involved community members who stayed on top of this and made sure that all of our agencies were aware of, what was going on here, making sure, that everyone was checking if this was in fact permitted, if, the Harris County Engineering Department, if the Army Corps knew that this construction was taking place within an area that was bought out for flood purposes. And so this image here is looking north to the river, and you can see they're bringing in, really heavy equipment. And on January 15th, we got an update that, and this is copied straight from the update that I received, that Harris County Engineering sent a notice to stop construction immediately and a notice of forthcoming inspections. So, I would say that our persistent community members had a bit of success here, certainly, and really just wanting to make sure that there's checks and balances in place, that if you are going to be doing these activities, that they are permitted, that they're actually allowed to take place. The people who live just across this road were very concerned. What happens if they have all of these barges moored right here in an area that supposedly is not to receive any type of business permits? And the next storm comes, what happens then? And so residents have been really, really concerned about this. And so I wanted to just be sure that I shared this latest update with y'all and the bit of progress that they've made. So I'm showing you here what is the area of concern as outlined by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's actually a pretty large area. It goes down below Old River and it goes up north where the river bends. And as you can see, this is the San Jacinto River waste pits here, and this facility was being, the attempt for it to be installed was adjacent to there. All right, so now let's go ahead and get right into the Waste Pits Superfund process. I'm going to do my best to explain all of this information to you guys without being too tired and getting jumbled. There's a lot of writing that's going to be on the screen. Y'all know I don't prefer to give that kind of presentation, but there's a lot of technical stuff. First and foremost, I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we are all aware that Gary B., who was the remedial project manager for the waste pits with the EPA, has retired. He retired just before the new year. And his successor is Ashley Howard. She's a very nice young woman. She has worked for the EPA for 11 and a half years, and she has worked on the Waste Pits Superfund Site for 2.5 years, working directly with Gary. And so she, has a fair amount of experience with this site in some of the more complicated technically speaking, the more complicated years, and quite a bit of time to be caught up to speed. And so she also has someone else who is working on the waste pits with her. So she's not the only new person, but she is the remedial project manager. So she's the new lead person, and Gary is now retired. So hopefully he's He's enjoying that. The last time that we all met, I informed you that we were going to be attending an EPA Community Advisory meeting in December. And we had that meeting via Zoom. It was a very well attended meeting. It was hands down the most attended CAC meeting that I've ever been a part of, and I've been on the CAC for many years now. There were over 30 people on the Zoom, and you know, the CAC is made up of um, folks from the responsible parties, their consultants, various government entities, as well as elected officials. And for example, Brian Babin's office has always been very involved with the CAC. And then there are some of your nonprofit and or advocacy groups like SJRC in there to hear the information, represent the community's voice, and to relay that information that we learn in these meetings to the public. And then another example of another nonprofit that's a part of the CAC is Galveston Bay Foundation. Okay, so any of the slides that look like this, that are white with the blue graphics on top, are straight from the EPA. So all the ones like this, they came directly from Gary's presentation that he gave to the CAC. So first I want to present to you kind of some of the technical challenges and uncertainties that they went over in this meeting. Some of these are not new, new concepts to us. But first and foremost is that the change in excavation depth. And so basically the change in excavation depth going from what was originally understood of maybe 12 to 14 feet to over 28 feet, doubling that depth, has just carried a theme through almost every part of this design of how it's going to be remediated, because you're going to come in contact with more water. You're looking at putting the sheet piling over twice as deep. And so there's just so many more considerations now. BMP is best management practices. And so, they're looking at the effect of vibrations on the slope stability of the waste pits themselves. And the vibrations, it would be from driving the sheet piling down into the riverbed. They also have to consider the effects of vibrations on the pipes. There's a lot of infrastructure that runs deep underground, 90 feet and below, for a lot of the industrial facilities. And like there's gas lines and all kinds of stuff. Then you also have to consider the vibrations and how they might impact the stability of Interstate 10. It's a major thoroughfare for our nation. And we definitely don't want this remediation to cause issues with any of these really important and delicate items in close proximity to there. Also, as they are having to go deeper, they're going to be coming in contact with that much more water. And so it says here, excavation approach B, need for treatability testing of water treatment approach. So let me show you. Okay, so you see here, this is the northern pit, and you have approach B, cell 1 and cell 2 that are approach B, as well as cell 3. Cell 5 and cell 4 are approach A. So because of the depth of waste material needing to be excavated in cells 1, 2, and 3, they will not be able to completely dewater the area in order to excavate it. Whereas cells 4 and 5, they will be able to pump out most of the water that they will initially come in contact with. But these cells here, like this one here, is about 28 feet deep in certain areas. I believe this one is about 24 feet deep in certain areas. So they're going to be coming in contact with a considerable amount of groundwater as they get deeper and deeper into the sediment. And so that's why there's a bit of a different approach being looked at, and considering what difference in water volume they're going to be coming in contact with as they get deeper in the sediment and the waste material and how that water will be handled. Because, you know, if you're excavating waste material and you're mixing in groundwater, that groundwater, that water that you're encountering with that waste material needs to be treated. Okay, so for the community impact, there's two items that I see listed time and time again. And so the two items that they're, you know, looking at in terms of technical challenges and uncertainties that can impact the community is the truck traffic, which, you know, fortunately, it's a fairly easy on and off from Interstate 10 from where this is located. They will go through one stop sign. And then the noise associated with pile driving. They're looking at doing a double wall for the cofferdam for the sheet pile, because if they do a double wall, it won't have to go as deep, which would be safer for the pipelines. It would be safer for, you know, risks to slope stability. And so there's some major benefits to this double system. And so that's where the concern of that constant pounding of driving that sheet piling down into the riverbed. Other considerations that I wanted to be sure to mention to y'all, property access. You know, there's going to be a considerable amount of area that's going to be needed to stage material for the site, material once it's removed. And so property access, the Texas.Â bridge replacement, and the expansion of the Lake Houston control structures. So, you know, in the future, they are going to be doing planned releases from the Lake Houston Dam, which is going to increase the chance of flooding downstream where the waste pits are. And so for these major items here, the Texas.Â bridge replacement, as well as what's going on at Lake Houston, the EPA has been coordinating and communicating with the entities that are working on these two major efforts for quite some time. So I know these items have come up from time to time in our conversations. So I wanted to be sure I let y'all know that you know, the agencies are communicating, and that they have been communicating, that they are still communicating. Okay, so when we saw the sampling that took place to characterize the waste, we were really concerned. So let me explain why characterization is important. So the waste is so toxic, if you will, that it required a cleanup under Superfund. Under Superfund, the waste was called hazardous. And that is what prompted a Superfund cleanup. Well, then we get into having to recharacterize or reclassify that, because Superfund and what prompts Superfund and those laws is different than the body of laws that govern how our waste is disposed of. So you have to go through this process of sampling and assessing the waste to characterize it for disposal. And looking at the samples that were taken to do that, we were incredibly concerned. I think it was over 80% of the samples were taken from areas that had below the cleanup goal of dioxin material. And so we did not feel, you know, our opinion was that the samples that were taken were not characteristic or representative of the waste that's actually going to be hauled off and disposed of. And why does that matter? That matters because what is sampled on the site to set up all of these processes needs to be representative, because it details worker safety on site, how the material is handled on site, how it enters our roadways, how it's, you know, transported on our roadways from the waste pits to its final place, and then how it, what type of landfill it can go to, and how it is or is not looked after indefinitely. And so this is very, very important. So when we saw, you know, that the problems with the characterization, we addressed these with the EPA. And they asked the responsible parties for more information and more supporting material on their position, because their position based on their characteristic sampling and evaluation was that the waste should be non-hazardous. And so the EPA requested more supporting information for that position. And then the EPA did an internal review of the information they were provided, as well as historical information for the site. Not only did our folks at Region 6 in Dallas evaluate all of this information, but they also bumped it up to the federal level, and the RCRA group also performed their own independent review. Now, who's the RCRA group? Well, RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, is actually what sets out the laws that have to do with our landfills. And so that is why that group got involved. The region brought that group on the federal level into this process and said, okay, y'all are the ones, that are the experts of experts on landfills and disposal of hazardous and non-hazardous material. Let's bring you in to help evaluate this. So they did. Now the conclusions here outlined by the EPA. The EPA agrees with the determination that the initially generated waste would not be a listed hazardous waste. Listed is the key word there. There are not that many listed hazardous wastes, and with respect to how many toxic compounds, how many chemical compounds there are in our world. So dioxin, they believe, is not one of the listed hazardous wastes. And then reviewing the sampling that was done that I referenced earlier, and pre-design investigation 1 and 2, they are of the opinion that the waste is not characteristically hazardous. So in the CAC meeting, I pushed Gary. I said, Gary, with over 80% of the sampling for this characteristic analytical testing coming from areas that are not even going to need to be remediated, how can you even use that, as one of the parameters of coming to this conclusion? And Gary said that there will be a time where additional waste will be characterized, and it will be prior to the final disposal. So I then started asking, well, how often? Per truckload, 1 sample, 5 samples per truckload, per ton, what does that breakdown look like? We've got over 200,000 cubic yards of waste material, dioxin waste material, leaving this site and traveling off site into a permanent disposal facility. What's the frequency going to be? And those details are not yet solidified. They are going to be outlined in the final design. And so we will have a concept, a plan for this sampling and the protocols prior to construction even taking place. So, I can't say I agree wholeheartedly with every part of this conclusion, but I do support the fact and do agree with the fact that there is going to be another step of checks and balances, but it's going to be all of our duties to make sure that when those final reports come out, that when those details are laid out, that we're looking at them, that we're paying attention to them. It's going to be very, very important. This is about the integrity of this project from start to finish, and we have to make sure that this waste doesn't impact our community in the cleanup and doesn't impact the community where it's going. So I want to elaborate on the RCRA characteristic wastes. Something that I learned in this meeting, in the CAC meeting, actually really surprised me. I was already up to speed on, I thought, on the 4 characteristics: ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, and toxicity. So when they're looking at this waste to look in the analysis and see, is it characteristic hazardous? They look for 4 parameters. 1, ignitability. Can it readily catch fire? Can it sustain combustion? 2, corrosivity. Think batteries, right? Is it acidic or alkaline waste? Reactivity, readily explode, or does it react violently? So think maybe nuclear waste. And then toxicity. This is the one that I never really understood until December. I thought, just, we know how toxic this is. You know, we know dioxin is said by so many scientists and so many medical professionals to be one of the most toxic chemicals ever known to man. So how could we even debate this one of these 4, right? Well, I just really always struggled to wrap my head around that. Well, what it comes down to, again, the way it's broken down in our laws and regulations, like most of this, is not like we would think. So the toxicity component evaluates for the presence of 40 chemicals. That's it, 40 chemicals. So what they look for when they look for toxicity is any of these 40 chemicals. And dioxins are not one of the 40 chemicals under RCRA that are, evaluated. So, this is really, this is the breakdown of the laws and regulations, and not necessarily part of the process. But still, we're always looking forward at ways of how we can improve and better this process. Okay, so the EPA said that based on their review, they're of the opinion that this waste is suitable for a Subtitle D non-hazardous landfill. Okay, so like I said, forgive me, these next few slides are going to be a lot of writing on the screen. But very, very important. This is so important, and I'm really glad to see those of you that are on here. I'm really glad to see y'all here because most of you have been engaged with this for many, many years. Okay, so a Subtitle D focuses on state and local governments as the primary planning, regulating, and implementing entities for the management of non-hazardous solid waste. Okay, so Subtitle D landfills include the following. There's 2 primary types of Subtitle D landfills. One is a municipal solid waste landfill, what all of our trash goes to. The other is an industrial waste landfill. An industrial waste landfill, there has, different types of industrial waste, solid waste landfills. Some of them might deal with construction and demolition debris. Some might be more set out towards coal combustion residuals. But at the end of the day, when Gary stated Subtitle D in the CAC meeting, right away red flags went up for more people on this call than just myself. And I just said, Gary, we've got 2 here, right? We've got a municipal solid waste landfill. We've got your neighborhood landfill, and we've got an industrial waste landfill. Can you tell us that this waste from the waste pits, from this Superfund site, is not going to a neighborhood landfill? And he said that it will not be going to a municipal solid waste landfill, that it will go to an industrial waste landfill if the sampling and analysis that takes place during remediation stays in tune with what they've seen in the latest rounds of sampling. So why is this important? Well, the waste is likely going to Lake Charles, the Lake Charles area. We were told by the EPA that the waste was probably going 100 to 120 miles east. Well, what's 100 to 120 miles east of Channelview or Highlands? Lake Charles. Okay, so that's a different state. So what I just said about Subtitle D is that it's primarily left up to the local and the state government for regulations. So what that means is that my team and I have been investigating the potential landfill requirements, not just for Texas, but also for Louisiana, because it's probably not staying in Texas. So a major downfall that we found, a major sticking point that is going to be coming up time and time again, I can guarantee from us, is that in this type of landfill in Louisiana, it is only required to be monitored for 30 years once the site is considered closed. So I'm going to elaborate on that in a minute. I'm going to actually show you structures of what these landfills look like. Why are we concerned about that? We know that in a pit-like setting, this waste will remain toxic for hundreds of years. So only monitoring it, only looking after it for 30 years, that's not going to work. That is not going to ensure the safety of that local groundwater, of the local environment, the local community, of the wildlife, the animals. So that's definitely going to be a major sticking point for us. Okay, so according to the Louisiana state regulations, this waste would be type 1 waste, and this right here outlines the requirements for this type of landfill in Louisiana. Now, type 1 waste can actually also be something in Louisiana called a land farm. We're not going to get into detail on that because we don't need to wrap our heads around that there's even any possibility there, because what a land farm is essentially it's a landfill that has to meet some more requirements than you see on the screen. But once it's closed, food is grown on top of it. It's used for cropland. So we're going to talk about landfills and leave land farms off, assuming that there would be no chance that that would happen. So first of all, a detailed plan and drawings showing the original contours of the land, the proposed elevations of the base of the units prior to the installation of any types of liners, and then also the proposed final contours. Think, you know, if any of you are familiar with the dump in Humble, right? I say it's like the only mountain in Houston. And so I also just happened to go to Humble High School. So I grew up down the road from it. But, you know, it's like the only mountain in Houston. And so that's what we're talking about then, that final contour, the shape of the top of the landfill. And then detailed drawings of slope, levees, and other pertinent features, the type of material and its source for levee constructions. There will also have to be cross-section maps drawn that show the original and the final grades, as well as the drainage, the locations and types of liners. Why all of that matters is talking about rainfall and runoff from rainfall, and then also potentially any percolation or saturation of water into the surface. Okay, so also a description of the liner system, and then a description of the leachate collection and removal system. So leachate would be any liquid material that migrates through the site, and it could come from water seeping in or just the material in and of itself, you know, releasing water over time. What you're not seeing here, though, is anything related to like an audit, checking for structural integrity over time, any kind of sampling or analysis over time. So that's why I wanted to show you here what these requirements are and what they're not. Okay, so my team dug up this document that we have found to be very helpful. One of the items that we have used in our review, it is called Flawed Technology of Subtitle D Landfill Filling of Municipal Solid Waste. And so I pulled some information here that I wanted to share with y'all on the differences in what some of these structures look like. Okay, so this is more of your typical construction of a landfill. And so let's start from the bottom. And so native strata, the native soil, or not soil, the native rocks and groundwater and everything that is underground native to that area. Then there's a clay liner. Then just above that clay liner, there's a leachate removal pipe. And so any of that, water that is released from the site or that makes its way into the site over time, that's the leachate that they would remove from the system in efforts, in theory, of preventing that leachate from migrating into below that clay layer and into the local groundwater system. Then above that, you have the different leachate collection layer. You have then what is called the filter layer, and then you have the waste material. Into that waste material, you have a gas vent for things like methane, gas that build up over time, a fill layer on top of that waste material. Then you have a liner. And then you have what is said to be the drainage layer, and then topsoil. So when I mentioned the land farms, this would be in Louisiana. I don't know what other states allow this, where cropland would be. You notice here also, just to the left of this diagram, is a monitoring well. So there's also said to be shortcomings with the monitoring wells, because there can be a lack of an appropriate number of monitoring wells. Say the waste were to make its way out of this this linered system over here, over beyond the say the leachate pipe removal pipe, make its way over here into the groundwater system and go this way, go to the right. Well, you're not going to catch that in the monitoring well. And so that is one of the downfalls, is in one of the items that we will be paying attention to, is what is the direction of groundwater flow generally? What is it historically? Because it can change over time. And how does their spacing of monitoring wells and their specific locations play into that, making sure that they're actually at the key places that they should be. Now, this next one here, this is a double liner system. And so I would like to think this is a little more advanced, a little bit safer, rather than just this single layer system here, where you have basically like the leachate zone and then the clay liner. You have a double zone of the designated areas where, in theory, if material were to be seeping out of this site, it would hit a barrier. And I have seen some of the materials that these liners are made out of, and it is actually pretty sturdy material, reinforced, heavy-duty material. But at the end of the day, it's humans against nature, and Mother Nature is a beast of her own. And so we have to do everything we can to see that all the best checks and balances are truly in place to make sure that this waste is handled safely and definitely. Okay. That will conclude our presentation here about the specific item for the remediation. And now I am going to briefly mention a set of comments and a couple of questions that we got prior to the meeting. In the emails that you get, we always say, if you have any questions, please send them to us early. Sometimes I just work those into my presentation and I don't have to say specifically, this is a question that we got, but this one is a little off topic, if you will. So I wanted to be sure that I did bring it up. And so the person who sent this to me says that essentially this is all they're writing in black, is all they're writing, not my own words or ideas, is that, you know, they believe there is evidence that the Shell Chemical Company in Deer Park was involved in manufacturing Agent Orange and chlorinated hydrocarbons, and that they were known to have dumped some of this product or waste product into the waste pits historically. So the person asked, was the Shell Chemical Company ever considered as a potentially responsible party of the pits? If not, why? So, you know, when I see that, I think back to kind of what I've read over the years, what I've learned over the years, over the history of this site, the history of how the EPA established the companies that they did as the responsible parties. And to the best of my knowledge, Shell Chemical Company has not, you know, been a potentially responsible party. They're not currently a potentially responsible party. But looking at and identifying who those parties are that are held liable for the cleanup is very much under EPA. That's very much a legal framework that the Environmental Protection Agency handles, not us in any shape or form. And so we like to stay focused more on the path forward, more on actually getting this cleaned up, and let the EPA sort out who's actually going to pay for that cleanup. And so I have seen a lot of the paperwork, a lot of the reports, a lot of court filings from over the last decade and even beyond, you know, going back to the 1960s of looking at records of this site. I haven't seen anything about Shell Chemical Company. The next question is, if Shell Chemical Company contributed waste material to the pits and the material was generated through the manufacture of Agent Orange, how would this information affect the disposal plans for the San Jacinto waste pits? I don't believe this would impact the waste pits and the plan for disposal. So why I say that is because the EPA has required extensive testing of hydrocarbons in the waste pits, in the northern pit and the southern pit, and they haven't found hydrocarbons. So if Shell were in fact dumping these chlorinated hydrocarbons, I would think that they would have found it in some of their thousands of tests to date. And aside from that, if it was in fact, you know, the specific dioxin molecule, the TCDD, that is one of the ones we're dealing with from the paper pulp, it's not listed as a hazardous waste under RCRA. Yes, it's a hazardous substance under CERCLA, which prompted the Superfund cleanup. But then what leads to the disposal is if it's a hazardous or non-hazardous waste under RCRA. So, you know, I don't think it would change the course that this is going. Okay, so speaking of how this is going, I wanted to give you guys the latest dates that we have for this year. And so we have the final design for the southern impoundment that was supposed to be handed over to the EPA and in December of last year. So I did inquire. I've not heard back yet, but I did inquire, you know, whether or not the EPA has in fact received this report. I think it was actually supposed to be November, and then it was December. And so I was hoping to be able to tell y'all if in fact it had been received. But at this moment, I'm not sure if the final design has been received by the agency or not. As soon as we find out, as soon as it is made available, we will definitely start going through and digesting that final design document. The design for the northern impoundment. So the pre-final design is due to the EPA from the responsible parties and their consultants in April of this year. So the pre-final design is the 90% design package. So, you've heard me talk a lot about the 30%. And what that means, what the milestone of 30% means. Now we're to that point where the 90% is going to be due to the EPA in April. So they will be 90% of the way complete with the concepts, the plans, all of the reports, all of the details, not just for remediation, but also things like health and safety, the safety plans that also are a big part of the design package. And so then the EPA and a few other technical folks will go through the 90% design package, and they will submit feedback to the responsible parties and their consultants. Then that feedback is to be considered, digested, maybe or maybe not adhered to, depending on what the feedback is. And then the final design is due to the EPA in June of this year, so this summer. And so that is not expected to take a substantial amount of time for back and forth in terms of review, then comment, then consider, then present a new document, because most of that should take place between April and June. So in theory, depending on how what's the feedback is considered that's given from the 90%, in theory, once that final design is presented to the EPA in June, the process should be able to move forward pretty quickly. All right, shifting gears, another really, really important item that we are juggling in motion with learning about, all of this remedial stuff. So I wanted to mention to y'all that we are trying to get as many people in the surrounding communities to fill out our health survey. We worked with Texas Department of State Health Services about 5 years ago to look at and to do a cancer investigation. And at that time, the Texas Cancer Registry, their data wasn't even, I think, 3 years up to date. So we have not been able to get the latest data from the Texas Cancer Registry in quite some time. And in order to maximize our efforts when we go to the state health department, ask them to pull information from the Texas Cancer Registry, we need to make sure that we know of every type of cancer possible that the state should be looking at in the Texas Cancer Registry. Because again, like our law, a lot of our laws and regulations, it doesn't work like you would think. They actually cannot go into the Texas Cancer Registry and pull all of the cancer diagnoses for a specific area. They have to go in there per cancer type, and then they can retrieve that information for a specific area in a specific time period. So if you haven't filled one out, please do. If you know of people in the community that have battled certain types of cancer that maybe won't want to fill one out, or members of your family, you don't have to let us know their specific information. You can just send me an email and say, Jackie, I think that the state should be looking into, this type of leukemia, so that, we're not sharing other people's personal details. But we just need to make sure that our community members have filled them out for their household, and that we can collect as much information as possible to make this survey as accurate as possible. Something here that I found extremely concerning, UT's School of Public Health actually has a really phenomenal online GIS database. And what you're looking at here is a map of Harris County, and I put in the parameter to show where cancer diagnoses were in 2018. So the red indicates greater than about 9 to 13 cancer diagnoses. So basically that's the highest concentration of cancer diagnoses compared to any of these other colors you see within Harris County. Well, guess what? Do you notice how that red area follows the river? right there is Banana Bend. I mean, this is Banana Bend. It eerily follows the river, and where the areas are that have the greatest concentration of cancer diagnoses in 2018. So just adding another layer to the complexities of what we knew about, higher rates of cancer within this area. So please take a few minutes of your day to fill out one of our health surveys. The link should be in the chat. We host it on our website. And before we get to questions, looking forward, the save the dates, March 9th will be our next town hall. That's where we go through each of our projects, but if you don't attend it live, you can go to our YouTube and literally click the timestamp that takes you directly to the San Jacinto section. If you don't care to hear about all the other program areas, I won't take offense, completely understand. If you just want to, hear about your community, all the power to you. And so we make that easily available to where you can just go and click to that specific time for your community. And then on March 23rd is when we will have our next San Jacinto community meeting. And now I see I've got some questions in the chat, which is lovely. So let me get out of screen share. I am also going to open up the line in case folks want to chime in, but let me get to the chat. Okay, Anna. These diagrams do seem to be better designed than the initial waste pits. Yes, but it does seem that over time, deterioration and lack of long-term 100+ years monitoring the landfill could impact the local community as much in much the same way that we are enduring. Are the EPA Are the EPA and other parties thinking that dilution is the solution to justify allowing it to go into a landfill location of this type? I know we hear that, dilution is the solution to pollution. And no, I don't think that's the notion here, though. I think that what we're up against is the outdated breakdown of our laws and regulations. And so I don't think the angle that we could come at this, Anna, is based on what they have right now to date for testing, hazardous versus non-hazardous, because it's that, this type of waste isn't corrosive. It's not ignite, it doesn't react violently, so then with toxicity and what fits under the disposal requirements of only being 40 compounds and dioxin not being one of them, I mean, it really is mind-blowing. I think it would be easy for any of us to understand the great cost difference between a hazardous landfill and a non-hazardous landfill. I think we're talking millions of dollars there. But I think the way the best way for us to approach this is negotiation, is attempting to use your voice, use all of the public's voice, our community members' voice, to advocate for stricter protocols, to advocate that in the consent decree and that legal binding document, looking at this in perpetuity, that the Department of Justice, the EPA, and the responsible parties sign, is that looking at that and making sure in there that it's required to actually not just meet that 30-year, right, that minimum state reg, that they actually will have to go beyond that. And so I think coming at this from a point of what can we strategically advocate for to make sure that, like you said, this community isn't impacted like the surrounding communities have been, like our seafood has been. And so Hopefully I answered that question for you, Anna. Okay, has there ever been further decisions about the removal process being year-round versus outside hurricane season? Yes, so that has definitely been a hot topic. So when the record of decision was signed, their understanding was that the waste was 12 to 14 feet deep, right? And so with that understanding, it was estimated that construction would take about 2.5 years. Now with the new understanding of the waste needing to be cleaned up all the way down to almost 30 feet, they have come up with this 7-year timeline. And I have asked the EPA, is there wiggle room? Is there budge room? Because I let them know that the community didn't agree with what they were saying. What the EPA was saying was a response to community concerns, right? So when this 7-year timeline first came out in recent years, part of what the EPA was saying was that it was in response to the community being concerned about construction during hurricane season. Well, that's true. The community is concerned about construction during hurricane season, but every community member I've asked has said they would rather it get done in 2.5 years of hurricane seasons than 7. And so I let the EPA know last year that this theory that they have that they're actually serving the community with this 7-year timeline doesn't add up to most of our community members. And we even actually sent out a survey via email to all of you to see what your response was. And the EPA said that it is actually more than hurricane season that they're looking at, that they have actually gone back through all of the historical flood data. And that's the big part of what increased from 2.5 to 7 years, is because the time window or the window of where they will not do excavating is not just hurricane season. It's actually the height of flood season, which starts several months historically before hurricane season. So it's actually about half or a little over half of the year that they're not planning to do active excavation. And so during those non-active excavation months, they're planning to be treating the water, to be doing these other items on site that they're going to also have to do as part of this remedy. And treating the water that they encounter is actually going to be one of the most, if not the most extensive and expensive parts of this remediation, because they thought, okay, we're going down 12 to 14 feet. We're going to encounter these shallow water bearing zones. We're going to encounter the water from the river. But now they're going to be encountering so much more groundwater that's literally one of the most, if not the most expensive items they're looking at. So I've not gotten any budge there from the EPA. I did ask if there was any wiggle room, that they need, and let them know that they need to be aware that if there is any wiggle room, the community wants it, that the community is not okay with this 7-year timeline. Okay, also, are you aware of the new pipeline being laid through Lynchburg and across the river? Yes, I have heard of this, and I believe it is a center point pipeline. I did receive some maps of the pipeline. I've also received some photos, but the maps that I received and the permit information that I received is actually a pretty old permit. But in the construction just, fairly recently started. It all has center point on it. So if you have any information, if it's not the center point pipeline, please let me know so that I can get that information to the EPA. But I did let the EPA know about this pipeline. They were unaware of it. So again, thank you, community members, for making me aware. Y'all's local knowledge, the boots on the ground, our community members that are there day in and day out, y'all's local knowledge is so essential. And so again, the EPA was not aware. And thank you, Anna. And luckily, our community members, our eagle eyes, let us know. And now the agency is aware of that. All right, so I believe I have addressed everything in the chat. Oh, here's one more. Yes. Yes, thank you, Carolyn. I did address that in the very beginning of the presentation. Carolyn dropped in the chat that, saying that the barge terminal and the bar at the San Jacinto River Estates is an ongoing fight right now. Carolyn, if you'd like to drop in the chat away, or even unmute your line and say how folks can get on your email list or get involved. Carolyn actually started a local community group in Channelview that addresses a variety of issues, and she's just been a stellar community leader and really staying on top of that unpermitted operation that was taking place, or that has been taking place there in the river bottom that I mentioned at the beginning. Okay, and so she dropped an email here, and so she sends out information from time to time related to a variety of things for the community. It's C.I.C.77530 @gmail.com. And so that is the email that you can contact Carolyn if you would like to stay abreast on these different topics. One hot topic, like she said, the fight that's going on right now in the river bottom community and the Channelview community is this potential barge terminal. What was that?
Hi. No, I was just putting it, it's the Channelview Health and Improvement Coalition is what that stands for. CHIC, the CHI, just that, I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn.
It's a long name.
I hear you. We have one of those too. So yes, that's what the CHIC stands for, Channelview Health and Improvement Coalition. Very catchy. I love it.
And right now, we have them stopped. Just presently, they're pending. They've been told to stop and to that they have pending inspections. But there was a comment made to me that they were considering or thinking, is there a possibility of an after the fact permit for the constructions that's already been done on the bar? And so our understanding is no permits at all of any kind are supposed to be allowed in the San Jacinto River Estates due to its flooding problems. And I'm pretty worried about the fact that even the mention of an after the fact permit was mentioned at all.
Right.
And also then that leads me to think that there would be the possibility of them considering a permit for the barge facility. So even though we haven't stopped right at this moment, I got my worries, and you know why I have worries. We get hit with after the fact permits and just unbelievable reasoning for why they were given a permit on some of these projects to start out with. But
no, I agree. I mean, there has to be accountability, right? And people doing the work unpermitted and then getting an after the fact permit. I mean, where's the accountability there? And this is definitely a potentially dangerous situation. Carolyn, if folks wanted to use their voice or get involved or contact somebody, what would you recommend folks do to try to support these efforts?
Well, right now, I have been speaking with Brian Brown with Harris County Engineering.
Okay.
So if you contact him and voice your concerns over it, he did comment that he thought it was a lot of bad ideas all rolled into one spot. But to voice your concerns over it, especially with the impacts that it would have on the community and I-10, the waste pits, all that. And if they're doing all of this right now under the radar, what confidence do we as a community have that they will conduct business in a safe manner? They've already proven it don't, rules don't matter.
Great point. Great point. And so with Harris County Engineering Department, that was, you said Brian Brown?
Brian Brown.
Right.
I will, if they contact me and they want his, I will give them his email, so they can start the conversation there. There's a couple of other people, but he's I think the main person right at the moment, and he disperses it out to other people. So
Okay.
I'll share that email. I don't have it in front of me right at this second.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Yes. This is information I put up earlier about this. So folks, if you, which is right here, I mean, very close, as she said, to the community, very close to the interstate, as well as the waste pits. And so if you would like to get further involved in this specific issue, you can contact Carolyn, or you can contact with Harris County Engineering Department, Brian Brown. And if you need any of that contact information, please feel free to follow up with me. I think you all have my email and our general email as well. Awesome. Thank you, Carolyn.
You're welcome.
All right. Okay, folks, I have kept you longer than promised. So thank you all for tuning in tonight, for staying engaged. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all in several weeks from now. Take care. Bye-bye.